The envelope had been postmarked 7 years before it arrived. Dorothy Harlan was 67 years old, and she was sitting on a folding chair outside a shelter on Clement Street, counting the money in her coat pocket for the 3rd time that morning, because counting it made it feel like more. It was not more. It was $41.60, which was what remained of the last week of her life as she had previously understood it. The coat smelled of cedar and old wool. Her husband Walter's coat, the one she had taken when she left the house, because it was January, and because it was the only thing in that house that still smelled like something she recognized. The collar was stiff. The lining had been repaired twice, both times by her, both times with thread that didn't quite match. She was not watching the street. She was watching a pigeon work at something on the sidewalk, with a patience she recognized, and she was thinking about the letter in her other pocket, not the money pocket, the other one, the letter from a law firm in Marin County that had arrived at her daughter's address 3 days ago and been forwarded to the shelter with a yellow sticky note that said, simply, "Mum, call me." She had not called. She had read the letter 4 times. The 5th time she would understand it, she told herself. She was on her 4th. The letter informed her, in language that was precise without being warm, that she had been named as a beneficiary in the estate of one Raymond Harlan, her late husband's brother, dead at 81 of a stroke he had been anticipating since his first one, 12 years prior. She had not spoken to Raymond Harlan in 9 years. They had not parted badly. They had simply parted the way people part when the person connecting them is gone. What Raymond had left her was listed in a single line: one antique music box, mahogany, non-functioning, manufacture approximately 1901, estimated value negligible. She repeated the word to the pigeon, who was unmoved 2 blocks north, in a glass-walled office above a parking garage. Raymond's step-nephew Preston Whitfield had just learned what he had inherited. His attorney, a man named Caldwell, had spent 40 minutes reading numbers aloud. The total came to $1.8 million in liquid assets, 3 properties, and a 19-foot sailboat Preston had never seen but immediately intended to sell. Preston Whitfield was 44 years old and wore a Breguet watch that cost more than Dorothy Harlan had earned in any single year of her teaching career. He was not a cruel man in the way that requires effort. His cruelty was the passive kind, the kind that comes from never needing to imagine another person's situation. The letter had said to contact the firm within 30 days to arrange collection of her item. Dorothy refolded it along its original crease. She put it back in the pocket without the money. She looked at the pigeon, who had found what it was looking for and was gone. She had 30 days. She did not yet know what that meant. Neither did anyone else. That was the thing about the music box. No one had ever looked at it correctly. The law offices of Caldwell and Holt occupied the 4th floor of a building that smelled of leather and recycled air and the particular confidence of people who have never been told to wait in a hallway. Dorothy had been told to wait in the hallway. She waited for 22 minutes. She counted them. When she was finally shown into the conference room, Preston Whitfield was already there, seated at the far end of a table long enough to seat 12, with a coffee he had not offered to share and a phone he set face down, with the practiced gesture of a man performing attentiveness. Caldwell was a compact man with the smile of someone who had spent decades delivering news that required smiling. He reviewed the estate summary with the efficiency of a person who had reviewed many. Preston Whitfield's inheritance was itemized across 4 pages. Dorothy's inheritance was a single line on the final page. The music box was brought in by a paralegal in a cardboard box filled with tissue paper, as though it were fragile, which it was, or as though it were valuable, which Caldwell had just finished explaining it was not. It was small, smaller than she had expected from a thing that had required its own cardboard box. Mahogany, as the letter had said. The lid was inlaid with a pattern of vines and a small bird that had lost one wing to what looked like a very old impact. The brass key mechanism on the side was frozen. The hinge on the back had separated on one side, leaving the lid slightly canted. She lifted it. It was heavier than it looked. Preston Whitfield glanced at it once. "At least it's decorative," he said. In the tone of someone being generous, Caldwell cleared his throat. "The estate notes indicate Mr. Austen was particularly insistent it go to you, Mrs. Austen. He wrote a separate codicil to that effect." "Raymond was sentimental," Preston said, and the word sentimental in his mouth was not a compliment. He stood, buttoned his jacket with the unhurried certainty of a man whose afternoon had already been planned. "A box that doesn't even play. But I suppose if it meant something to him." He shrugged the shrug of a man performing tolerance. "Enjoy it, Dorothy." He had used her first name. She had never given it to him. She set the music box on her lap and held it with both hands while Caldwell finished the paperwork. It was warm from being carried. The brass fittings had a smell. Metal and age and something underneath that she could not name yet. Something dry, like paper kept in the dark. Raymond had been insistent. That was the word Caldwell had used. Insistent. Raymond Harlan had been a quiet man. He had not been insistent about many things in his life. She had known him for 31 years and could count the things he had been insistent about on one hand. She thought about that on the bus home. She thought about the smell of old paper. She thought about the weight of the box, which was wrong for its size in a way she couldn't articulate. She had been a music teacher for 38 years. She knew what a music box should weigh. This one weighed more. She put it on the shelf above her cot at the shelter. She looked at it for a long time before she slept. The broken wing on the inlaid bird caught the light from the hallway. Raymond had been a careful man. He had not broken things accidentally. The address in the codicil, not in the letter, in the codicil, which Caldwell had given her a copy of without explaining why it existed separately, was for a property in Sonoma County, off a 2-lane road called Voss Creek Road, 11.4 miles east of Healdsburg. She took the bus to Santa Rosa. $41.60 had become, after bus fare and a coffee she should not have bought, $26.15. She had called her daughter from the shelter's phone the night before. Her daughter had wired her $40. She had not asked why her mother needed to go to Sonoma County. Dorothy was grateful for that. A man named Rodrigo gave her a ride from Santa Rosa in a truck that smelled of cut grass and diesel, and the faint sweetness of something flowering she couldn't identify. He left her at the turnoff to Voss Creek Road, with directions that assumed she could see landmarks she could not yet see. She walked 2.3 miles. The road was unpaved past the first cattle gate. January in Sonoma, cold in the way that is wet rather than sharp, the cold that settles into coat seams and stays. The music box was in a canvas bag over her shoulder. She could feel its weight shifting with each step. The property was not a house. It had been a house. What remained was a structure, walls standing on 3 sides, the fourth open to a sky that was the particular white of winter that is not quite cloud and not quite light. The roof had collapsed inward long enough ago that what was inside was not debris but landscape. Young trees growing through the floor joists, ivy organized along the remaining walls as though it had been planted there. She stood at the open edge where a door had been. The smell was cold earth and rotting wood and something underneath. Stone, she thought. Old stone? The smell of a foundation that had been dry and then wet and then dry again across many decades. She had almost not come. On the bus, she had thought, "There is nothing here." a collapsed house on a road named after someone long dead, an old man's sentiment, a broken box, but Raymond had written a codicil, a separate legal document drafted 6 weeks before he died, witnessed by 2 people, filed with his attorney, specifically directing that this address accompany the box. That was not sentiment. That was instruction. She stepped over the threshold. The floor inside was uneven, soil and stone and broken wood. Her foot came down on something that did not give. She looked down. Stone, but cut stone. A threshold, she realized, an interior threshold, the kind that separates a main room from a smaller one. The kind that, in older construction, sometimes indicated a change in floor level. She crouched. She pressed her hand against it. It was not part of the floor. It was set into the floor. The gap around it was too clean for settling. Someone had placed it there, intentionally, and then built a room around it, and then let the room fall down, or someone had let the room fall down on purpose. That was what she thought. She was not wrong. She was simply not finished finding. She did not have tools. She had her hands, which were 67 years old, and had spent 38 of those years teaching children the correct way to position their fingers on keys. Her hands knew pressure. Her hands knew patience. The stone was approximately 14 inches by 22 inches, and it had been mortared in at the edges, or had been once. The mortar had dried and cracked across decades, and she worked at the largest crack with the edge of a piece of roof tile she found 3 feet away, using it as a lever, pressing with her full weight in the way you press on a piano key you want to sustain. It moved on the 3rd attempt. Not much. Enough. Beneath it was not soil. Beneath it was a tin box, roughly the size of a document case, sealed with a strip of wax that had held for 87 years in the cold and the dark and the weight of everything above it. She sat back on her heels and looked at it without touching it for what she estimated was 2 minutes. The cold was in her knees. The canvas bag with the music box was against her thigh. The tin smelled of metal and wax and something dry that matched, precisely, the smell she had noticed in the music box's brass fittings. She understood then that the music box had been the map to this, not a metaphor, an actual map. She did not yet know what that meant. She was beginning to understand the shape of what she did not know. The wax seal broke with pressure from her thumb. The lid required both hands and a specific angle. It resisted. Everything that had been waiting this long resisted. Inside, a letter, handwritten, folded in thirds on paper that had yellowed but not disintegrated. A folded document. Legal, she could see the heading, and beneath both, a second sheet of paper, heavier, with markings she recognized before she understood them as a map, hand-drawn, precise, labeled in the careful script of someone who drew it to last. She read the letter first. It was dated March 14, 1938. It was written by a woman named Eleanor Voss, and it began, "If you are reading this, you were given the box by someone who understood what it was for. That means you are not who I was afraid of." Eleanor Voss had been the wife of a man named Franklin Voss, who had run a lumber business in Sonoma County and lost it, and then run up debts he could not pay, and then attempted to dissolve a land trust that Eleanor had established in 1931 in her own name, using money she had earned before the marriage from a patent her father had filed in 1909 and transferred to her, and which Franklin had not known existed until he needed it. The land trust was for 340 acres. The letter said it had been worth, at the time of writing, approximately $190,000. It said it had been held in a structure that prevented a husband from accessing it under California law, as it stood in 1938. The letter said the trust had been designed to transfer, automatically, to the holder of the music box, verified by knowledge of its mechanism. Upon presentation of the enclosed legal document to the Sonoma County Land Records Office, the knowledge of its mechanism Dorothy looked at the canvas bag. She read that line again, verified by knowledge of its mechanism. She had been a music teacher for 38 years. She had repaired more music boxes than she could count. She knew, without needing to check, that a music box manufactured in 1901 with a frozen key mechanism frequently had a secondary release panel in the base, a panel that could only be opened by pressing the first and third keys of the musical scale it had been tuned to simultaneously for 3 seconds. She knew, because she had noticed when she first lifted it, that this box was tuned to C minor. She sat with that knowledge in the cold, in a collapsed house, on a January morning, with a letter from a woman dead for 60 years explaining that she had just inherited a land trust that 3 independent assessors, she would later learn, had valued at $2.31 million. She was still sitting there when she heard the car on the road. She had been found. She did not yet know by whom. She was not afraid. She had been found before. This was different, and she knew it was different, but she could not yet name how. She put the letter in her coat pocket. The one without the money. The car was a grey Mercedes S-Class, and it parked on the road with the precision of a person who parks everywhere with precision. Preston Whitfield got out. Behind him, Caldwell. She was standing when they crossed the threshold. She had made sure of that. Dorothy. Preston looked at the open floor, the displaced stone, the tin box she had not attempted to hide. His face arranged itself into something careful. This property is part of the estate. You understand that anything found here is subject to estate law. Caldwell opened a folder. He had prepared paperwork. He had expected to find something. That was the thing she noticed. He had expected this. This was not a surprise visit. This was a scheduled collection. "The codicil directed me here," she said. "The codicil directed the music box to you," Caldwell said, with the precision of a man who had chosen each word in this sentence before leaving the office. "Not the property. Not anything on the property. California estate law is clear on the distinction between personal property and real property. Whatever you've found here belongs to the estate." Preston looked at the tin box. He looked at the music box in her canvas bag. He looked at her with the expression she recognized from the conference room, the expression of a man performing patience with something he has already decided is beneath him. "A box that doesn't even play," he said again, almost to himself. "A reflex, a category label." She filed it. Caldwell placed the folder on the stone beside the open cavity. Inside, a document requiring her signature, transferring any claim to items found on estate property. A deadline, 48 hours, after which the estate would file for legal recovery. A clause she was meant to find intimidating because it referenced court costs she could not afford. She looked at the document without touching it. "I'll need to read this," she said. "Of course," Caldwell said, in the tone of a man who believed 48 hours was a shorter time than it was for a woman with $40 and no attorney. Preston picked up the tin box. He looked inside it. He removed the folded document, looked at it without unfolding it, put it back. He did not remove the letter. He did not see the letter because the letter was no longer in the tin box. The letter was in the pocket of a dead man's coat, worn by a woman he had already categorized. He did not remove the map. He refolded the document over it without looking at the second sheet beneath. He put the tin box under his arm. "We'll be in touch," he said. He walked back toward the car without looking at her again. Caldwell followed. At the threshold, he paused. He looked at her with something that was not quite apology and not quite warning. Then he left. She stood in the cold, in the collapsed house, holding a canvas bag with a broken music box inside it. The tin box was gone. The legal document was gone. The map was gone. She pressed her hand against the outside of her coat pocket, where the letter was. She felt it there. She thought about the line, verified by knowledge of its mechanisms. She thought about 48 hours. Then she started walking. She called her daughter from a gas station in Healdsburg. Her daughter called a law professor she had gone to school with, who called a colleague who specialized in California land trust law, who spent 45 minutes on the phone with Dorothy that evening, free of charge, because the colleague had a grandmother who had once lost a property in a way she still talked about, and some things are not about billable hours. The colleague's name was Simone Garrett, and what she told Dorothy was this: a land trust established under California law in 1931, structured correctly, could transfer to a named class of beneficiaries outside of probate. The trust document, the one in the tin box, was not estate property. It was a legal instrument with its own transfer mechanism, independent of Raymond Harlan's estate. Preston Whitfield had taken a document that was not his to take. More importantly, the trust required verification of the holder. Specifically, according to the 1938 founding document on file with the Sonoma County Recorder's Office, where Eleanor Voss had recorded it, quietly, without her husband's knowledge, in March of the same year she buried the tin box. The verification mechanism was proof of knowledge of the music box's secondary release. The Sonoma County Recorder's Office opened at 8 in the morning. Dorothy arrived at 7:43, with the music box in her canvas bag and a printed copy of the 1938 trust document that Simone Garrett had located in the digital archive at 11 the previous night and emailed to the shelter's office printer. The recording clerk's name was Ernest, and he had worked in the office for 19 years, and he had never encountered a trust verification of this type before, and so he called his supervisor, who called the county council's office, which sent a representative named Mercer, who arrived at 9:15 and read the document with the careful attention of someone who understood, as he read, that this was going to be discussed at office meetings for years. Mercer asked her to demonstrate knowledge of the mechanism. She placed the music box on the counter. She located the first key of C minor, the leftmost of the original Tyne set, identifiable by a small filed notch she had noticed on the day of the inheritance, and catalogued without yet understanding why. She located the third key. She pressed both simultaneously, held them for a count of 3. The bass panel released with a sound like a breath held too long finally let go, inside. A second letter, this one dated 1938, addressed to no one and everyone. This is how she will know. She will know because she listened. Mercer noted the verification in writing, signed it, had Ernest stamp it, and filed a copy with the recorder. Simone Garrett filed the trust transfer claim at 10 o'clock. By 2 in the afternoon, the county had confirmed the trust's validity. By 4, Preston Whitfield's attorney had been notified that the tin box he had removed from the property contained a document that was not estate property, and that its removal constituted interference with a valid legal instrument. Preston Whitfield called her. She let it go to voicemail. She had borrowed her daughter's phone for the day. He called again. She listened to the voicemail later, once in Simone's office while Simone finished the paperwork. His voice had a quality she recognized, the quality of a man who has discovered that a category he assigned with certainty was wrong and cannot identify the moment he made the error, and this is the most disorienting kind of being wrong. He said, among other things, "I just don't understand what you think you're doing." She did not return the call. She thought about what she would have said if she had. She thought about the conference room and the Breguet watch and the word sentimental in his mouth and the way he had looked at the music box. Once, briefly, without interest, she would have said, she left it to the person who would listen to it. "You never heard it playing. I heard it the moment I picked it up." She did not say it. It was enough to know it. She stepped out of Simone's office into the January afternoon, which was cold and clean and smelled of rain coming, and she stood in it for a moment before she did anything else. The trust transfer was completed on February 28th. The 340 acres were valued, as of that assessment, at $2.31 million. Simone Garrett firm handled the transfer on contingency. A portion of the land was sold, 210 acres to a land conservation nonprofit, at Dorothy's instruction, for $1.4 million. The remaining 130 acres, which included a creek and a stand of Franklin fir that had been growing since before the Voss house was built, she kept. Preston Whitfield and Caldwell were referred to the California State Bar and the County District Attorney's Office for the removal of the trust document. The matter was settled without criminal charges through an agreement that required, among other things, a formal written acknowledgement that the document had not been estate property. Caldwell's license was placed on conditional probation for 18 months. Preston Whitfield's name appeared in a Marin County legal newsletter that no one read except lawyers, which was enough. Dorothy Harlan used $340,000 from the land sale to purchase a small house in Healdsburg, on a street that ran parallel to the creek. She planted a garden. She built a music studio in the second bedroom and began teaching again, privately, by referral, 3 students at a time, children who were told by their parents that their teacher had a gift for listening. She kept the music box on the windowsill above the piano. It still did not play. The key mechanism was still frozen. She had chosen not to repair it. Some things are not broken. Some things were built to hold still until the right person arrived. On the day she moved in, she stood in the kitchen of her new house in the early morning, in the light that came through windows she had chosen herself, and she made coffee, and she listened to the creek outside, and she thought about Eleanor Voss, who had hidden a fortune in a music box in 1938, and trusted, without any evidence that she should, that the right ears would eventually find it. Eleanor had been right. It had simply taken 87 years. The things meant for us do not always arrive on time, but they are patient in ways we are not required to understand until the moment they reach us.